Welcome home, everyone. This is Unrooted, a podcast for those who belong nowhere and everywhere. Today, we have our wonderful guest, Isa, who is from Brazil. Very, very exciting. Today, we're going to be talking about being comfortable away from home, diving into what it takes to be comfortable away from home and to be away from the place where you grew up. And we're going to be sharing our own experiences. Isabella has some really interesting stories. She's traveled a lot. She's lived in multiple countries and knows firsthand what it's like to adapt to new places. So we're going to have some fun. We're going to tell some cool stories and So, this is Isa. She lives in the same building as me, in this co-living. So, you're from Brazil, right?
Yes, from São Paulo.
Sao Paulo.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And you studied in Boston, so you lived in Boston for some time.
Yes, for some time.
She studied at Harvard, which is really, really cool. Smart little cookie. And then she moved around a little bit after that. Maybe just tell me a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I'll introduce myself, maybe give you guys a bit of the timeline. So I'm Brazilian, so are my parents, although people question that oftentimes based on what I look like.
I'm guilty of that. When I first met her and she said she was Brazilian, I was like, calculating.
Beep beep. So I'm pretty used to that, and sometimes also because of how I sound in English or even how I speak Spanish, I don't have the typical Brazilian accent. Even yesterday at the gym, this lady was like, one, she thought I was Dutch, and two, with the way I spoke Spanish, it wasn't the typical Brazilian accent. So I was like, I've been speaking a lot of English, even more than Portuguese, I would say nowadays. And so it's this big, combination of factors and influences that I've come across my whole life, and that makes me who I am, I guess, as cliche as that sounds. So back to the start, I was living in...
But wait, sorry, because you said that you were living in... Well, what you told me was that you were living in an area that's mostly where, like, Germans and Italians kind of migrate to? Was that...
Yeah, I was living there for 8 years. I moved there when I was almost 11.
To where? To
Curitiba.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, so I'm from São Paulo, and I've lived in different cities in that state. But then the place that's like, heavy European immigration, I mean, São Paulo as well, but where people look more blonde, I would say predominantly, that's even more south of Brazil. So south of São Paulo, there are 3 states, and I was living in one of those 3 states. And so even, in terms of Brazil, it would make more sense for me to be from there than São Paulo.
Okay.
Because of my looks. But then again, Brazil is such a diverse country. We have a little bit of everything everywhere, even though I definitely don't look like the majority, so to say.
Yeah.
But
do you still speak a lot of Portuguese? Do you, obviously when you talk to your mom or your dad, like, you speak in Portuguese to them?
Yeah. Okay. Portuguese is still my first language. If we're looking at it chronologically, at least, it was the first language I learned, and the language that I speak with my family. And I'm fully comfortable in Portuguese. Like, I'm 100% fluent. Okay. I would say nowadays, and even for the past many years, I would say it's not the language I use the most. And it's not the language maybe I'm the most comfortable with in terms of like writing perhaps or working, because even in school it was predominantly English.
Right, you went to an international school like me, right?
Yes, like you.
So cool.
Yeah. Mine was American though, so American International School.
International.
Yeah. From when I was 10, and before that I was going to a French school. So I've had these international influences since a very young age, since before I, could even read or write. So I think that, kind of ties into this topic of what's made it so, I think, natural and easy and fun, to move around. And
yeah, I was thinking about this last night. It just like kind of popped into my head.
Yeah.
I was like, what makes it comfortable? What makes us comfortable being far away from home? And there's a lot of factors, but I feel like one thing that's definitely helps with that is the fact that we were raised in a mix of cultures. And I think that sort of like from a young age maybe triggered a little like travel bug inside of us.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of like already, because we've been mixed in those cultures, we're already like maybe used to being in different cultures. So we're okay moving around and being in different places.
Yeah, for sure. And I think with people with this more, different background, with different, upbringings and so forth, we just have a different maybe sense of what it means to belong and feel like we belong. I think that's why we like where we live so much, because we're so different, right? Everybody's different nationality, they speak different languages, but we all have a similar background in that sense of moving and then having to start from scratch, Sometimes I wish I could go back home and I had this very solid group of friends, but that's not the truth. I have some friends, I have some childhood friends, some people who stayed, some people who left and came back. But even when I go back to Brazil, it's largely, I would say, because of my family, because all my family's still there. But my friend groups and even my best friends and closest friends, they're kind of spread out.
Yeah.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
I have very close friends in Asia, US, Europe, some in Brazil, so it's like a little bit of a mix.
Yeah.
Which is not, let's say, the most comfortable situation, but at the same time, I kind of have a home everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's really cool too.
Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm kind of the same with Marbella. I don't really have that many like friend connections in Marbella. There's people that I do know that live there. But whenever I go back to Marbella, I'm usually just hanging out with my family. I don't really like meet up with anybody because I'm not really close to anybody who lives there. So, but that kind of like reminds me of like one of the points that I wanted to make today. Just speaking of like the topic of home, or like where we grew up, is that there's like a difference, I think, between missing the place itself and missing the idea of it. Whenever I was away from Marbella, I would like kind of romanticize my home so much, because like just having nostalgic feelings and everything. And then I would go back and then I'd be like, oh, it's not really like the fantasy that I built up in my head.
Yeah.
And then I just go back to wherever I was living at the time, let's say New York, and be much happier there. But I'm realizing I kind of do that with New York as well. Now that I'm living here in Madrid, I think about New York and I'm like, oh, I miss it. But then I second guess myself. I'm like, do I miss the idea of it, or do I actually miss the place itself?
Yeah.
Because I'll be watching like, I don't know, Sex in the City or something and seeing like the scenes of like places that I used to go to and be like, oh my God, I miss it so much.
Yeah.
And then I would think about my actual like life in New York and be like, maybe not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
But have you ever lived in New York, or?
I haven't lived in New York. I've been to New York many, many times, because I was living in Boston for many years and New York isn't that far away. So we would go pretty often. I was just in New York for New Year's, for a few weeks. So yeah, it's definitely a place that I feel pretty, not at home in, but like, I know it pretty well and so forth. But I don't think I'd ever live there. It's a bit too chaotic for me. I think when I was younger, maybe college age, I did kind of have that idea. A lot of people moved to New York after college or did internships in New York. So it was always like the place to be.
Yeah.
And even nowadays to some extent, you know what I mean? A lot of people, even, that I've met here, they kind of want to go to New York and kind of like experience the hustle culture and the energy. And I get that. I just think you got to really know like what stage in life you're at and why you'd be going, and just really having a clear goal in mind, I guess, because it can be, it can be a lot. It's also very expensive, so there's a lot to factor in, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But you were living in Boston because you were studying there.
Yeah. Specifically in Cambridge, right? Because that's where the college is, but 20 minutes from Boston.
Isn't Cambridge in England?
Yeah, Cambridge is in England, but I think the US kind of, there's a Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Well? Oh.
I think the US kind of stole the name. I mean,
interesting.
New England, right? So,
true. Okay.
Yeah.
After Boston, where did you move to?
After Boston, I was in, long story, but the plan was to move to Europe. I felt this calling to live here, and I really wanted to live here, and I had everything in place. I was actually going to move to Italy and take it from there. The plan wasn't to stay in Italy forever, quote unquote, but I was going to start there. And then the month I was supposed to move there, which was March 2020, that's when the pandemic hit. And I don't know if you remember, but Italy was really like negatively impacted after China. It was like the second, worst country basically. So my flight was canceled. I couldn't go. At the time, I was visiting my family in Brazil. So right after the US, I went to Brazil to visit my family. And from there, I would fly to Italy. And then I just couldn't, right? Because COVID, oh my God, what is this thing? Everybody was super scared. So was I. And so I was stuck in Brazil with my family for a couple months. At the time, I was a pretty recent college grad. I wanted to be anywhere but home with my parents, It's not ideal. I was like, I want to see the world. I want to have fun.
Yeah.
And so that's when I started kind of thinking about, okay, what can I do? I don't want to be stuck here because, who knows how long this is going to take.
Yeah.
My mom, she's very well informed about, I guess, geopolitics and trends. She worked in strategy consulting at the time. So she was always in the loop about those things and making predictions. And, her and her team, they could predict that it would be a years long thing and not just 3 months and then we're back to normal. And that's what ended up happening. And so I was like, okay, where can I go that's safe, that I have an interest in the place? And that turned out to be South Korea. So yeah, I moved there that summer.
But why South Korea? What drew you there the most?
Yeah, so I know it sounds pretty random, right?
Yeah.
Especially where I'm from and the places I'd been to before.
Yeah.
So I had been in Korea before in 2019, so 1 year prior. I was there for a week as part of my college graduation trip. And after that, I was in Japan for 3 months. So I'd been in Asia for a little bit. And, during all of my years of college, I had a lot of Korean American friends and Asian American friends in general, but a lot of Korean American friends. And so I was exposed to Korean culture during those years of college and eventually went there. So I was very interested in the culture, the language, the music, the media and so forth. So yeah, and it was also very safe. Korea took the pandemic very seriously. They had a lot of, measures in place for safety and protocols and so forth.
Yeah.
So
how many years were you living there?
A year and a half.
A year and a half. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So really in the height of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But
did you get to experience South Korea the same way, even though it was the pandemic? Were you able to, because you said that they were super, safe with it, but were you able to go outside and experience the city and the people, the food, and, I don't know, do day trips to, places of nature and stuff? Were you able to do that during that time?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I was very lucky, especially in my first 9 months or so there.
Yeah.
Even though, restrictions existed, it was mostly wearing a mask most of the time. But I had a blast, especially that first year there. We would go out a lot. We respected the rules of, social distancing and so forth.
Yeah.
But because Korea had such few cases and few deaths compared to other countries, it was almost, it wasn't inexistent, but it was very, very little, really. So I was able to really go out and have fun and travel, and I was living a normal life, except with a mask on. But I was able to really do everything, and I remember having the time of my life where everybody else in my life who was, in the Americas or Europe or wherever, they were really stuck at home, not doing much. That was very much the case in Brazil. And so I just felt very happy and confident about my decision to go there.
What year was this?
This was 2020, and then into 2021.
Okay, because I had a similar experience. I went home in 2020 when the pandemic hit. I was in London, and then I went home to Spain, and then I went to New York in January 2021 because I went there to study acting.
Okay.
So I felt very lucky that I was able to travel during that time and move to New York in such a strange time.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of people decided to move home after the pandemic because most of the world became so digital.
Yeah.
And, remote, that people started moving back home during that time and have stayed home since then. But But people like you and I still decided to like go somewhere during that time. And I've experienced New York before the pandemic and experienced it during the pandemic, and it's definitely two different New Yorks. But you find like ways to make it your home or make it homey through like the people that you surround yourself with. I mean, I don't know about you, how you felt trying to make South Korea your home at the time during such a strange time.
Yeah. That's a very good question. There are a lot of peculiarities to that. So, when the first time I went there in 2019, I just went like no visa, just stamp my passport. With a Brazilian passport, you can stay up to 3 months. That's how I did that. Then when I wanted to go back in 2020, I knew I wanted to live there. But, there were a lot of restrictions in place. You couldn't just go as a tourist anymore because of COVID. And so I knew I needed at least a 6-month visa to stay. And I was like, okay, what do I do? And then I eventually decided to apply for a language visa, like a student visa to learn Korean. Which for me was like kind of 2-in-1 because I get to live in the country.
Did you learn some Korean?
I learned some Korean.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I was studying Korean for 6 months and through that program. And then at the end of those 6 months, I ended up getting a job there. And then I kind of switched over to a work visa. And that's the visa I was on for the next year. And that was a whole process in and of itself, very bureaucratic and definitely stressful because I had to keep going to class, not to lose my visa and be kicked out of the country while I was waiting for my work visa to be processed. So I remember that time being very stressful because I had to study and work.
Yeah.
And, studying wasn't just, an hour a week. It was 4 hours every day, Monday through Friday. So all my mornings, and there were a lot of tests and exams for some reason. It was very intense.
Yeah.
But it was nice because it forced you to learn in a way.
Yeah, visas are a bitch. I remember dealing with my visa in New York City was a nightmare. And I know a lot of people who might be watching this can relate because they make it so hard for you in the States with the whole visa situation. But so after South Korea, you said that you traveled around a little bit and then you ended up coming to Madrid, right?
So after Korea, I decided to move back to Brazil. Because I was just, I do believe it's largely a mindset thing. I was like, when I first moved there, I was open to staying there forever if I really liked it. And then after all that time, what really changed things for me was going to New York in the summer of 2021.
Okay.
And it's funny because, I
was there.
You were there? Oh my God, so funny. Yeah. And then I remember, the vaccine had just come out and that was like the first thing on my mind. I was like, oh my God, I need to get this vaccine. And so I remember I get there and then the next day I get the shot.
Oh my God, I had to get 3 shots. I didn't want to, but I was forced to because of my school.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know. Let's see if I grow out a third leg.
Yeah, we'll see. I also got a bunch of shots in different countries as well. So anything could happen. We'll see. But yeah, and then being there that summer, it was June and then it also, happened to be Pride Month. And it was such diversity and all shapes, colors, beliefs, and all of that. And Korea, is a pretty homogenous country in a lot of these ways. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying it's very different. And so to me, it was very shocking. I had a bit of reverse culture shock. And then I remember even during the trip, I was like, wow, going back is going to be pretty strange. I was like thinking of that already. And then when I went back, I had to quarantine again. That was my second time quarantining at home for 2 weeks, which is very strict. You literally can't even open your front door. So very, very strict. And then I had a lot of time to think during those 2 weeks when I was stuck back home. And then I was having this feeling of like, I don't think this is my place for like the long run.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, but I also don't want to make any, rash decision and then regret it, So I was like, okay, I'm going to stay here at least another 4 months or so.
So you felt like South Korea was not your place?
Yeah, especially after the New York trip. I think the contrast was so obvious.
Yeah.
That it kind of got me thinking about my values a little bit and what I wanted in life. And I decided, I guess, that I wanted somewhere a bit more, heterogeneous, diverse, a little bit more open-minded in a lot of ways, that Korea simply is not. And yeah, that's when I also decided to move back to Brazil because I hadn't lived there since leaving for college many years back.
Yeah.
So I hadn't experienced Brazil as an adult.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, maybe it makes sense. I want to leave Korea. I don't really have anywhere that I can go. I didn't want to go back to the US. And so, yeah, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to live in my home country as an adult and see how I fare.
How long were you doing that for?
I did that for another year and a half.
Okay. In Sao Paulo?
In Sao Paulo.
Okay.
Yeah. I just decided for Sao Paulo because all my family is there.
San Paulo or Sao Paulo?
So in Portuguese, it's São Paulo. São. It's a very nasal sound. São.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And I really tried to make it at home. You know, I rented my own apartment. I furnished it. I did the whole thing.
Okay.
I was ready to stay.
I didn't know that you had lived there for a year and a half.
Yeah.
The South Korea thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. I was determined to stay, you know.
So what made you move again?
Yeah, you know, surprise, I just ended up not being as happy as I thought I would be.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't click with me in some important ways, I guess. I would say, especially socially.
Yeah.
It was a big challenge for me to like meet people, make friends, and I had maybe 2 friends from high school that were living there again. Mm-hmm. But, you know, each person has their own life and it's a bit hard to meet up, and so you do, but it's not super frequent, and I just wasn't feeling my best. Let's say I think I'm a very like disciplined and grounded person, but at the same time I love novelty and adventure, and I'm very curious and I love to learn, and I just don't think
so it's not even just like being comfortable away from home, it's just like wanting to be away from home. It's like we just want to get out of there.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. It's like we do, like I said, we do have that. I think growing up in that international environment has given us that travel bug of like wanting to be away from home, but also hold the thought that you were just saying. Yeah. But also what I was thinking is like, I don't even think it's like people who may have not even grown up in a mix of cultures, who grew up in one culture, their family is from one place and they grew up there and that's most of what they've known, but still have that urge to leave because maybe they have a calling somewhere else or something inside them tells them that that's not really where they're supposed to be, that's not really their home, and they end up living somewhere completely different. I have a friend who her family is like totally British, and she was raised with her siblings in England, and her sister ended up traveling to South Korea at one point and has been living there for the past 8 years.
Wow.
So I think some people just have a calling to like, go somewhere else. And
I really don't think there's one way to live a life.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are so different, and I think that's something to be celebrated instead of dissected and, you know, let's understand what's wrong with them and why they're not in, you know, this country or living in that way or with that person or whatever.
Have you ever received that kind of treatment from any friends or family? Do they like question your lifestyle or?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think nowadays it's been long enough where they accept it. And I'm just the daughter or the friend or whatever who's always abroad, always traveling, always doing some crazy unexpected thing. But I will say, I think the most difficult time for me was when I decided to move to Korea.